I know I promised this video would reveal some of the secret Easter eggs hidden in John Prine's Angel from Montgomery, and it will. But to get that info, you'll have to watch to the end. As we always do around here, we're going to start by exploring what makes this song so great. And friends, it is great. Once in a while, a writer appears fully formed. I'm not talking about a prodigy, but rather an adult who emerges in the public with their potential fully realized and speaks from both inference and experience. You've probably heard this said about Johnny Cash, Leonard Cohen, or Bill Withers. And you may have heard it said about John Prine, too. John Prine's first album was a revelation. I know people overuse that term, but in this case it's warranted. John Prine was a young man when he released Angel from Montgomery in 1971, but he didn't sound like it, and he sure didn't write like it. He possessed an eloquence, a raw honesty, and more than anything, an almost palpable existential ability to convey the human condition. Part of this is probably owed to raw talent, but part of it is also probably due to something that doesn't really exist in Americana anymore. John Prine was a very observant, regular dude from a regular background. When John Prine wrote Angel from Montgomery, he was drawing from both experience and a very observant and empathetic eye. He was a working class Midwestern Army vet, and yes, as advertised, he really was the singing mailman. John Prine wrote the bulk of his early material on his mail route while working for the USPS, and he said he viewed his mail route as his library, a place to do research and draw inspiration. And I think anybody who's ever worked labor, driven, or operated machinery full-time can relate to that. 8 to 12 hours a day is a lot of time for your brain to get creative. When you're outdoors doing repetitive work and not confined to the same cubicle all day, you have a lot of time and a lot of space to observe. I've always supposed that a postal worker meets a lot of interesting and, just as importantly, average and uninteresting people, and has a unique insight into people's private lives. And I'd guess Prine used just about every ounce of that insight in his early work. All these regular folks' slice-of-life songs on his debut are inspired by real regular folks and real slices of real lives. Although it opens with the line, "I am an old woman," Angel from Montgomery was actually written about a middle-aged woman. In discussing the song's origins, John Prine stated that he had already sort of written the book on old people with "hello in there," and he didn't want to be repetitive. But as he knew, and as you may know, there's a whole other cohort of old people in the world, middle-aged people who feel elderly. According to Prine, the lyrics began with a single image. He pictured a middle-aged woman living in an entirely common rut, standing at a sink full of dishwater and just deciding to walk away from it all. Her life hadn't panned out as she might have dreamed in her youth, and there didn't seem to be much to hold on to. Middle age is a very specific reckoning for most of us. More often than not, it is defined by a very pronounced exhaustion and acute disappointment that we have never felt before and never saw coming. It's pretty phenomenal that a 20-something John Prine could so accurately evoke it. To believe in this living is just a hard way to go. Amen, young fella. Nobody in modern popular music wrote details like Prine, and his philosophy regarding details and minutiae in lyrics was one shared by history's most evocative fiction writers. Prine said, "You save the details for verifiable specifics rather than emotions and vagaries. Describe the room. How far is the door from the sink? What color is the chair? How did Sam Stone buy his house? Speak in the character's voice. And of course, show, don't tell. Build your audience's trust with narrative and then, in turn, trust them to infer your character's emotions and motivation rather than trying to feed them a feeling." As you may have noticed by now, when people talk about John Prine, they talk about the lyrics, and the lyrics are phenomenal. But on this channel, we talk about music, so about that music. Angel from Montgomery is a pretty simple composition, but it's not too simple. It has a G root, but it's not necessarily the key of G major as we're used to it. It's very folksy in the verse progression, 1, 4, 5, and G. But the chorus incorporates an F major that keeps the ears on their toes. I guess someone with more education than me would say it's mixolydian or breaks key by incorporating a flattened seventh in the chorus. But I like to say that the F major gives it a little spice. It's a mildly spicy composition. And I'll be honest, when I play this number, I like to throw a gloomy little F6 in there. Great folk music is like a great recipe. You can make it your own as long as you don't bust the fundamentals. If you bust the fundamentals, you could still get something very tasty, but you'd be playing with genre. Oat folk fusion, buddy. Anyway. The other thing I think is really interesting about the composition is the rhythm. Most of the original recording is a straight 4/4, but there are brief shifts at the end of each stanza. I think it's 36 bars if you're playing it full time, where the rhythm breaks down and comes, essentially, to a rest. Pretty much everyone says that this is a conscious shift to 3/4 time, but I think they're overcomplicating things. I think it shifts to free time. Angel from Montgomery was recorded with the legendary Memphis Boys at American Sound Studio, and the sessions were, for all intents and purposes, John Prine's first time in front of a band. When you put a solo singer-songwriter in front of a great session band, there is always a danger of over-arranging, making the raw bits more standard or making the compositions too dynamic and drowning the honesty. But if you know the genre, which these cats certainly did, you know that a folk singer's guitar and vocal parts work together, and everyone else's job is to follow those movements and that cadence as written. This can be especially challenging for a drummer, but drummer Gene Chrisman handled this both tastefully and organically, while still keeping the composition on the rails and moving. Those time shifts may be what makes the recording so enduring and unique. And despite the fact that percussionist Hayward Bishop is on record saying that he dreaded backing a young John Prine, I'm guessing none of the Memphis Boys ever regretted it. Between 1971 and 1974, Angel from Montgomery was covered by all sorts of artists, including a really unorthodox Carly Simon version that was rejected by Elektra Records, but eventually released in 1995. The version you know, however, is the Bonnie Raitt version from '74, and it is phenomenal. The Bonnie Raitt recording is sort of a dialed-in full band version. It's in a different key, and the time signature is consistent throughout, but otherwise it is relatively reverent. The Prineisms shine through. Like John Prine, Raitt was also young when she recorded this song, but it didn't hinder the credibility at all. Probably because she is Bonnie Raitt and she can do anything. Her rendition not only brought John Prine's compositions to a far broader audience, but also fulfilled some of his other ambitions. He stated in interviews that he was always surprised when artists, especially women, would cover his songs and request a duet with him. Well, this song became a Bonnie Raitt signature number, and she never missed an opportunity to bring John out for a duet. The two shared a special bond through the rest of his career and life. I guess it's one of those very few wholesome and heartwarming showbiz storylines. And now, as promised, the mysterious part. What are the secret Easter eggs hidden in the Angel from Montgomery lyrics? On the surface, the song is about a middle-aged woman in Alabama who wants out of her marriage and out of her monotonous life. She longs for an angel to rescue her from the doldrums, maybe the sort of angel you might see on an old rodeo poster. But why did John Prine choose Montgomery? Well, Prine said that he chose it because he was a big Hank Williams fan. Hank Williams was from Montgomery, and referencing Old Hank would seem intuitive in any song about longing and regret. But friends, that ain't it. Here's the secret reference that I think is hiding in plain sight. In 1952, Hank Thompson, another Hank, released the single "The Wild Side of Life." "The Wild Side of Life" is a classic country tune about restlessness, cheating, and divorce, and it introduced most of us to the term honky-tonk angel. It is probably even more notable for the response it drew with Kitty Wells' record, "It Wasn't God Who Made Honky-Tonk Angels," also released in 1952. The two songs shared the same melody, and the Kitty Wells single was a female response portraying the other side of a marriage that disintegrates in a stagnant pool of restlessness. It's also worth noting that "It Wasn't God Who Made Honky-Tonk Angels" was written by a man and originally recorded by Al Montgomery. That's right, Montgomery, Al. Now, the term honky-tonk angel evolved a bit over the years, from a derogatory term similar to wayward woman to a more complimentary term for somebody who could steal your significant other or steal you from your significant other and your boring life. So I am proposing that in his most decidedly countrified composition, John Prine is exploring the dissolution of a marriage in 4 dimensions. He is alluding to an old honky-tonk song written by a man from the point of view of a woman that describes how the weight of our routines can make us long for a past that may or may not have been what we remember. And that song just happens to be about an angel. And it also happens to have come from Al Montgomery. We're through the looking glass, people. Were all of these allusions so literal and conscious? Maybe. Who knows? John Prine was a pretty wily and witty writer. What is important, though, is the dimension that these conflicting and asynchronous references add to the lyrics. In this context, the song becomes more cautionary. One of the hardest lessons we learn in long-term relationships, and one of the hardest lessons we learn in middle age, is that the grass isn't always greener on the wilder side of the fence. Our relationships are not what make or break us. Our partners are not responsible for our self-satisfaction. We are the sum of every personal decision we've ever made, and we take ourselves with us wherever we go. Time only moves in one direction. Ain't no angels coming to save any of us, and if there were, well, beware, because those angels are likely just as damaged as we are. After all, it wasn't God who made honky-tonk angels.